Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for participating in our webinar series that our Parent Center is putting together to keep parents informed. My name is Godfrey Rivera. I'm with the Metropolitan Parent Center. I'm here along with my friend and colleague, Ms. Doris Rodriguez, who's helping me out with the webinar, with the technical part. And once again, I welcome you to some information that we hope you will find beneficial and will help you with your child's needs. Um, You are listening to a webinar that's produced by the Metropolitan Parent Center of Synergia, as you can see on your screen. And we also have a special program within the Parent Center that's called the Autism Initiative Project for parents who have children on the autism spectrum that also offer workshops and other special events. You can go to our website, which is underneath the day here, www.synergiany.org, and visit our calendar to keep informed about upcoming events. Uh, so today's conversation that I will be engaging with you is about something that's really very, very important in terms of being a parent of a child with a disability, and what is your role as a parent of a child with a disability when you have to engage and deal with school personnel. What does it mean, or how do you approach a teacher, related service people in terms of making sure that we're all on the same page and that your child is getting necessary and appropriate services? One good way to engage in that process is to have a total and complete understanding of your rights under a law that we're going to talk about today. It's called IDEA, the Individual with Disabilities Education Act. And I will be giving you some basic information about your rights. And at the end, there's a long list of resources that you could go refer to get more information. So let me start the program right now. Okay. Worked before. Doris, if you can hear me, please contact Milka and let her know that the frames are not advancing. Thank you. Here we go. I'll use the other arrow. Okay, I apologize for that, ladies and gentlemen. Um, Minor technical difficulty has been resolved. So the name of this presentation is What's the Idea? Once again, IDEA is the name of a federal law that we're going to talk about. And we're going to talk about that part of the law that addresses the rights of parents of children with, and youth with disabilities. And since that part of the law has six important pieces to it, we're going to address each piece or principle once at a time. So during this webinar, I will provide information regarding the legal rights of parents of children and youth with disabilities under this IDEA law. And we're going to have a discussion about what makes an education appropriate for a child with a disability. So we're going to spend some time discussing what makes an education appropriate. And finally, we're going to offer some information about how parents can be effective advocates for the
Godfrey, are you there? We can't hear you. Godfrey, you have to dial the number. We can't hear you in the conference.
Volume control is.
We still can't hear you, Godfrey.
Oh,
We can hear you, Godfrey.
all right, great. I unplugged it. All right, I apologize for that again. This is kind of new technology for us, so please bear with us. Okay. Yeah, yeah. All right. I believe let's pick up here. I don't want to mess around with this anymore. I apologize for that again. I really do. So let me discuss a little bit about this federal law that I mentioned at the very beginning, the presentation. It's called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA. It's are its acronym. And the idea, this law, is a federal law that describes special education services for children with disabilities from age 3, preschool, through age 21, when students can graduate from high school. This law, IDA, ensures that children with disabilities have the opportunity to receive a free, appropriate public education. Please keep track of this phrase; it's very important. You'll see in a few minutes why free, appropriate public education is very important. Children who qualify under IDEA are provided with services and accommodations that are individualized to their needs. When it says qualify under IDEA, that means that children have undergone an evaluation process to determine if they are a child or youth with a disability. If that determination says that they meet that qualification, they are eligible to receive services, uh, special education services through their school. All right, so let me give you a little bit more about information about FAPE, Free Appropriate Public Education. As you can see, each letter stands for something that's important. The letter F in FAPE stands for free. That means that the federal government pays for the education of children with disabilities, and there are no costs to families. Please be aware that when we say education, you see that we're referring to a public education. I'll address that in a second. Now, the letter A, appropriate, I believe is the most important letter in this acronym because appropriate means that a child who qualifies for special ed obtains an individualized education plan or program, the IEP, that has services to meet his or her needs. Um, Also, it's important to understand that appropriate means that the services that are indicated in the IEP are just designed to meet the specific needs of a child, of your child. That IEP cannot be used to address the needs of other students who may have special needs. Now, the letter P, publics, means that the child's education is provided and supervised by the public school system. An IEP team decides what services and support the student gets, and sometimes the children are placed in private or charter schools if, for whatever reason, the services cannot be obtained in a public school. Now, the E, education, means that the U.S. Congress has authorized the Federal Department of Education to enforce the law IDEA by issuing rules and regulations that schools must abide by. The idea is applied from preschool through high school. So let's look at the bottom part so we can look at that just a little carefully. FAPE, as we call it, is designed to meet the unique needs of a child. This can be achieved by providing the student with a disability with special services that may include services for academic, behavioral needs, related services that are designed to provide the student with supports. These are called related services. And I just gave an example of one. There are very many. And also modifications created by the school staff to create a learning environment more appropriate for students with disabilities. It means that a child with a disability will receive the same educational opportunity as a child without a disability. That's very important too, because in the United States, there's an education law that states that every child has the right to obtain an education. And this also goes for students with disabilities. They have every right to attend the school, to learn, to benefit from going to school, and to demonstrate progress at their school tasks. A little bit more about FAPE because it's very important. Now, in order to provide FAPE, schools must provide students with who have a disability with an education that includes specialized instruction and related services. Now, the whole point, and I emphasize this all the time at the workshops that I provide, is that these services, all of these things should be designed to help prepare our child for life after school. So after they finish, they go through the whole process: preschool, primary school, middle school, and high school. After that, if people have done their jobs and these services have been appropriate, the child should be ready to engage adulthood by having a number of options that are available to him. Can he or she get a job, learn a skill? That is something that should be addressed by the IP. Also, as the OV has indicated, if those are not appropriate options, then we have to look at other things like independent living opportunities, or for numbers of students for a college education, they may be able to go to a community school or even a four-year school, provided that that school, that organization has provisions to support them with their needs at college. Also, FAPE is achievable by providing the child with special services that include academic needs, addressing behavioral issues, speech, language services, and instructional modifications made by teachers to make more attainable a learning environment. So the teacher is a very important person that's involved in the education of your school, obviously. But if she has students in the classroom that have disabilities, she needs to understand how to best reach them and educate them and provide them with opportunities to learn and benefit from going to school. Now, let's look at the second principle that is part of your rights as a parent. But I have to emphasize it. Uh, I am just briefly going over some of these very important ideas, but I recommend that when you have some time, go to your computer, open it up, go to Google, and put in the search window, a question like, what is FAPE? It's really very, very important that parents understand how necessary it is for schools to provide your child with FAPE. Often, sometimes we have conversations with parents who have questions or concerns about their child's education, and I ask them to frame that issue inside of the FAPE understanding. You say that the child has speech and language services on his IEP, but it's not getting them according to what the IEP says. Well, if that's the case, then the school is not providing your child with FAPE. That IEP is a plan that indicates not only what services, but how often they have to be provided. So we have to be on top of everything. So just making it known that this principle is very important, and you should be have a thorough understanding of FAPE, FAPE. Now, let me talk a little bit about the second principle that I want to identify. It's called the least restrictive environment, or LRE, according to its initials. Now, the least restrictive environment means that a student who has a disability should have the opportunity to be educated with non-disabled peers to the greatest extent appropriate. Now, for parents who have children in the New York City school system, the least restrictive environment is considered the general education classroom, the general education curriculum. Uh, I often tell parents that they have an understanding that there's two educational systems in the city or in the school system, one for general education and one for special education. That is not the case. There is only one system, the general education curriculum and environment. So when we look at LRE, least restrictive environments, what what opportunities and supports do we have to provide that child so he or she can work at least part of the day in a general education classroom or an integrated classroom? But we'll talk about that in a little while. So this too is an important concept for parents to understand. We also say that the students should be provided with supplementary aids and services that are necessary to achieve the educational goals indicated in the IEP if they're placed in a general education classroom setting. Oftentimes, we have students that can do the work, but they need a lot of support from classroom staff, or more specifically, our paraprofessional. So as a parent, I said, yes, I don't mind that my child be in a general education class, but without a paraprofessional, he will not be able to survive in that environment. So we explore that idea and see how we provide that paraprofessional for a student, how many times a week, for how long, etc., just to make sure that he or she will have an opportunity to not just stay in that classroom, but to benefit from being in that general education classroom setting. And as I indicated, in New York City, the learning, the least restrictive environment includes the general education classroom, which I mentioned, and the inclusion classroom, which over here is identified as integrated co-teaching, the ICT classroom. Briefly, that's a classroom where you have two teachers and one paraprofessional who's there full time. One teacher is the general education teacher who's addressing the curriculum established by the New York State Education Department, and also a special education teacher. These are both full-time personnel, and her main task is to structure the classes that are being that the other teachers teaching in a way that they are accessible to students with disabilities. All right, so a little more about the LRE. Excuse me, the the least restrictive environment refers to the setting where a child with a disability can receive an appropriate education designed to meet his or her educational needs alongside peers without disabilities to the maximum extent appropriate. In New York City, uh, we usually are looking at a classroom, a general education classroom, that has no more than 40% of the students with IEPs, and the rest are just general education students. But this is the whole idea about a least restrictive environment to combine or place that student in the with a disability in the general education class, provide the supports and necessary to help him or her benefit from being in the classroom. Now, I've mentioned this phrase a lot, and over here it's in italics. Uh, so, which is important to indicate that the least restricting provision of the IDEA is the phrase to the maximum extent appropriate. And this means that the level of least restrictive environment a disabled child should receive is unique to the student's individual needs and the nature of his or her disability. The least restrictive environment must be linked to the child's IEP and instruction. So what this breaks down to is we need to understand a few things, and from the parent's point of view, I will say this now and I'll repeat it a number of times. We need to understand how the child's disability affects the way he or she learns, affects the way he or she communicates and functions in the classroom. It's really very important. If for whatever reason we don't take these essential points into consideration, the experience that that student will have in the general education environment may be very unfortunate and not very helpful at all. So I always tell parents, go out of your way to understand how your child's disability impacts the way he or she learns. It will make you it'll give you more information and knowledge to have this conversation with the rest of the IEP team. So once again, we could try placing my daughter, my son in a general education classroom, but what are the supports that he or she needs to stay in that class to make sure that he or she benefits from that environment? All right. Briefly now, the third environment, the third principle here is called an appropriate evaluation. Um, what we tell parents that before we can put together that IEP plan to help provide the child with supports and services in the classroom, we need to understand what are his or her needs and why this child is considered a child with a disability. So, in order to answer that question, there is the evaluation process, which is a process that the school undergoes along with parent participation to determine whether a child has a disability. Under the IDEA law, a child with a disability is one who qualifies for special education and related services. Um, a child cannot receive special ed education without an evaluation. The evaluation is completed in all areas of specific disability. Here's where I want to make another important point. Um, Parents need to understand that they are experts about their children because you raised them. Now, there are a lot of people that work with your child in the school system, teachers, counselors, related service providers, etc. And they possess very specific training and expertise to provide services for your child. And they go through a lot of documentation to learn about his or her needs. But they will never understand your child the way you do. It's very important that you consider yourself an expert on your child. So when you go to meetings, specifically the IEP meeting, you have a understanding, excuse me, of your child that you can explain to the people that are there to support him or her. So please understand that when you are go to an IEP meeting or participating in the evaluation process, please consider yourself an expert on your child, working with other experts who have information about services and supports that will help out your child. So continuing with what's on the slide here, the evaluation process is designed to gather information from a variety of sources about a child's functioning, development, etc. And you should consider yourself one of those sources that is one of the more important ones. And the evaluation also examines many aspects of your child, including cognitive or the way he or she thinks, academic needs, behavioral, physical, and other developmental parents factors. And as you said, the last sentence says it also includes information provided by the parents. Uh, you are an expert of your child working with other experts that offer other areas of expertise. But once again, in order for you to have a meaningful conversation with all these other experts, you must have a thorough understanding of how your child's disability affects the way he or she learns, functions, communicates, etc. You need to have a good handle on that to make that conversation meaningful. Okay, and the reason why the evaluation is necessary is indicated here. So once again, to repeat, before the school can provide special ed services to a child, uh, an initial evaluation in all areas of concern is required. Um, and when they say all areas, that means all areas. And once again, it's up to the parent to observe his or her child, make notes about issues that are of concern to her, and address those issues when she goes to the meetings, including the evaluation meeting and the IEP meeting. Excuse me. And further, an evaluation is a careful look at a child's abilities, strengths, and needs by a team including the child's parents, teachers, and specialists. It's important to note that the evaluation is not just designed to examine the child's needs and challenges. This is also a good time to look at the child's abilities, strengths, and needs. What does he or she like to do? What makes them smile and really feel good about things? Do they like to draw, dance? Do they like to take apart things and try to reassemble them again? These are all things that a parent has a lot of information available because he or she is observing his child, every day for many hours in the day and should be observing him or her and how he or she interacts with other people and with objects to see what's going on there. We have to let parents know that we're looking to see how to look at his strengths and capabilities and not just at his needs or issues. So the purpose of the evaluation is to determine whether the child has a disability and requires special ed instructions. In the next slide here, this is an important question. So according to FAPE, remember that I mentioned that the letter A stands for appropriate. So the question that we're going to be addressing now is what makes or what is an appropriate education? Okay, according to the IDEA law, some of the obligations that schools are required to provide to a student with a disability include an education that is specifically designed to meet his or her unique needs. That word unique keeps popping up many times, as you have noticing, because it's very important that we understand that every child is very is special and unique, and they all have their specific needs that need to be met by specifically and carefully designed resources and tools, et cetera, et cetera. The second bullet, we say that students' educational requirements are determined on an individual basis and should not be the same for each student with a disability. Now, uh, sometimes when let's just say that we have a related service provider like a speech therapist working with the child. Usually now in the Board of Education in New York City, when she is addressing this need, she is working with a group of children who their IEP indicates that they need related services like speech in this case. But nevertheless, even though she's working with a group, she needs to have an understanding of the specific needs of each child. And she gets that information from reviewing the child's IEP, talking to teachers, and also having conversations with parents to make sure that the training that she's giving, the therapy, is meaningful and will provide benefits to the child. And once again, the last sentence says it. These requirements are determined by understanding what is suitable and appropriate for the student. Once again, this is a place where a parent can provide really important information to the rest of the IEP team and to the teachers. What is suitable and appropriate. She knows maybe how long a student can be engaged in activity before he or she starts getting a little bit, antsy or starts to feel uncomfortable, and will tell teachers how much time that activity will be appropriate for the child before we need to consider changing that activity for him or her. So once again, I continue to emphasize the importance of parents understanding that they are experts about their children, their needs, and what how to address those needs. So I will keep making that point.
Godfrey, we can't hear you.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I don't know.
All right, thank you. All right, I just said, I'll repeat it quickly. Uh, Regarding what makes an appropriate education appropriate for a child with a disability, federal courts have determined that an appropriate education means that when we require services, accommodations, and modifications that give the student with this disability the greatest chance of progressing toward grade level performance that are based on state and local standards. So once again, if we have a child with a disability in the fourth grade, how does that IEP intend to provide all these things that are indicated here, services, accommodations, and modifications that will give him the greatest chance of demonstrating progress toward grade level performance? In other words, a general education student in the fourth grade is expected to learn such things. Let me just make something up. They're expected to write a paragraph about what something that they saw. So, what services can a child with a disability need in order to try to emulate that desired skill? In this case, writing a statement about something of interest to that child. So, but nevertheless, the word appropriate continues to be an issue that is very hard to determine because it was never really defined by the federal courts. So there's a lot of controversy, unfortunately, regarding this term. Okay, so once again, IDEA calls for an initial evaluation of a child that's required by IDEA before any special education or related services can be provided. It is IDEA that defines what a child with a disability is, and that's what the initial what the evaluation team must determine before we proceed to providing special education and related services. The second bullet is interesting and important too. Their IDEA calls for the establishment of a 60-day timeline from the time the parent provides written consent for the evaluation and the determination of eligibility and special needs for the child. Well, that means that parents should understand that um, you are the only individual that can authorize services for your child. In other words, you need to provide written consent, and you have to understand what you're consenting to before the school can provide that service. So when the second bullet calls for a 60-day time limit, once the parent authorizes the evaluation, the school district has 60 days to do two things. In the first 30 days, and these are calendar days, they need to engage and complete the evaluation process because we have to determine if the child is a child with a disability. And let's assume that the evaluation determines that she has a disability. Right after that, what happens then is the evaluation team is converted to the IEP team. It's basically the same individuals who are on the evaluation team who are also part of the IEP team. And by the way, parents is a member of both the evaluation and the IEP team. So, and then the IEP team has another 30 days to put together the IEP and enact it. They are very serious provisions that are the law in IDEA. If if for whatever reason the school district cannot confirm or conform to this requirement, and the parent is aware of her rights, at that point she can request that the child receive services in a non-public school, public school, charter school, etc., etc. Uh, because that is an important statement in IDEA that the school district must abide by doing both of these processes, the evaluation and the IDEA and the IP is 60 days, which comes to about a 2-month time limit. And once again, to review, the purposes of conducting the evaluation are to see if the child is a child with a disability as defined by IDEA, uh, to gather information that will help determine the child's educational needs, and further, to guide decision making about appropriate educational planning for the child. Okay, let me move on here. The fourth principle, fourth out of six here. This is a very important one, the IEP, the Individualized Education Program, which basically is a series of statements that are put together by the individuals on the IEP team that will lay a plan that will identify how the schools, how the related service providers, and all of the individuals are going to support this child so that two things will happen. The child will go to school and the child will demonstrate progress according to the needs identified in the IEP. That's kind of an important point that we need to be aware of. So it's much more than a legal document, which it is. It's very important that you understand that too. But it's also a blueprint that lays out the program of special ed instruction, the supports, the services, placements that will serve the students positively to allow him or her to make progress and hopefully succeed in school. I always tell parents that our children go to school to learn and to get better at academic and other skills. And that also applies to individual students that have disabilities. But that's why we have this IEP plan to specifically describe and provide all the services that are necessary for him or her to be able to learn and to demonstrate progress and succeed in school. And the IEP second bullet describes the services that the children needs and the reasons why he or she needs those services. And that second part is determined by going back and looking at what what was said in the evaluation component of the process. Uh, uh, we couldn't let's just examine or look at a child that cannot read or let me just that cannot write. For some reason, he knows how to what his name is. I can spell it, but does not know how to write that on the line. And the evaluation service determines why that may be the case. Is it a visual issue? Is it something neurological? We need to find out why what's causing these problems, and then to address them in the IEP plan. The IEP process also creates opportunities for teachers, parents, school administrators, related service personnel, and students, when it's appropriate, to work together to improve educational results and outcomes for students with disabilities. Let me address that issue. It's kind of important and interesting. And I'll be talking about what the situation is with the New York City school system. But we always encourage parents that when their children are old enough, and I'm looking at junior high school age children, 14, 15, 13, 14, 15, who have a disability, and because the parents have really worked hard to support their child, to be present for him or her, and to also tell her child or his child about all these rights that we've been talking about. According to IDEA, the child should be an effective member of the IEP team, if appropriate, to work together with the rest of the team to generate an IEP that will meet his needs and, more importantly, help prepare him or her for life after school. By the way, that process starts going back to preschool. I always suggest to parents that just because she is 4 or 5 years old, you shouldn't have it somewhere in your head, in your mind, that that you can't think about that now. Yes, you should. We always encourage parents to devote some of their attention to thinking about what they want for their child after they leave the school system. It's a really important issue that we'll discuss further a little later on. Okay, so once again, the IEP basically describes what special ed services the student needs and the reasons why he or she needs those services. And this information is specified in his or her IEP. You should know that the IEP is renewed every year. Every year, usually at the beginning of the school year, or depending on when the students started going to school, there's a meeting of the IEP team to either create or to update his or her IEP. And the bottom bullet says it's the IEP is revised annually, as indicated, or whenever it's necessary. That's an important part of this phrase, and because you parents need to understand that sometimes something happens throughout the school year that has some kind of impact on his or her child. For the example, let me give you two quick examples. Um, Grandma is living with the family, and the child really loves grandma, and unfortunately, she passes away. And that, of course, is going to invoke all kinds of emotional responses from the child with the disability. And then you notice that you get calls from the school that he or she is crying, not cooperating, and doing all kinds of things that are impacting her school performance. So at that point, the parent can request an IEP meeting to collect everyone that's in the that has to be there to discuss this issue about how to address my child's needs. Perhaps maybe we can include counseling in his or her IEP to address that need. So just understand that parents have the right to request an IEP meeting whenever it's necessary and whenever it's appropriate. Make sure that it's for a valid reason or reasons that you are requesting that meeting. All right. Principle number 5. It's also very important. Parent and, when appropriate, student participation in the decision making process. There is parent involvement in the evaluation IEP process, as we've looked at, to discuss eligibility for special ed services and placement decisions. Uh, Parents need to know that under IDEA, you have the right to participate in all school meetings. Uh, the IEP meeting, of course, meetings with teachers that are working with your child. You can maybe ask for a meeting, and it doesn't have to be face to face, as we're now seeing. That's going to be really hard to do for a while, but virtual meetings may be something that we need to look at more carefully in the future. Here's another nice one that a lot of parents are not aware of. You have the right to receive reports of your child's progress. There is there is a page in the IEP plan. You should find it. It's usually located after your child's goals are mentioned. And we could do a whole webinar on what the whole thing about goals, but basically, a goal is educational expectation held by the IEP team and the parents about what what kind of progress can be expected for that child to make, given the opportunities and resources to achieve that goal. So parents have the right to receive reports on the child's education. Um, let's look at quickly a child that has behavioral issues, anger, acting out, tantruming. Uh, and we put together a behavior improvement plan as part of the IEP. The parent has a right to require to have conversations or reports from the people that are initiating the behavior improvement plan, usually the teachers, to see if the improvement plan is having some kind of positive impact on a child. And if it is, that's great. We move along. And if it's not having a positive or impact on the child, we need to find out why and maybe tune up that behavior plan, the behavior improvement plan. And as I mentioned before, IDEA encourages students to be involved in decision-making process, especially regarding transition service needs and plans, which I'll address a little later on about that. We have to know that all these things, the IEP, the resources, the service providers are there to help prepare your child for life after school. You need to be aware of this point. It's really important that even though we're looking at what might be considered other things, everything should have a goal of uh, being able to involve your son, your daughter in and as a meaningful life as possible after they get out of school, after they get out of high school. All right, principle number 6, procedural safeguards, which is another word or words for your rights, your legal rights under IDEA. So let me just go quickly through these points here, starting with the box on the left. Parent notification. Parents have a right to receive letters, reports, IEPs, and any document that's about their child's education in their native language. Of course, Spanish, Cantonese, Mandarin, Urdu, Russian, and a number of other languages that are covered by the school system there. In New York City, the Department of Education has an interpretation and translation unit that is designed to translate their IEP, for example, into a language that their parent can read and understand and comment on. Please be aware that if you get an IEP and you can't read it because it's not in your native language, uh, please request that it be translated into your native language. And always, 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 whatever request you make sure you put it in writing. Or also, if you are talking to a special ed individual, excuse me, a related service individual, and he or she is talking about a different strategy or technique that he would like to use with your child, also request that information in writing. It's very important that you have documentation to back you up in case you need it. Uh, Parent consent, I mentioned at the very beginning. Parents have to give written consent for the school district to conduct the evaluation process. The parent is the only one that can authorize the IEP. Um, so make sure that you're aware that you are the only person that can initiate many or all of these special education strategies, resources, etc. Because under IDEA, you have the power to give your written consent. And the third bullet I kind of mentioned already, but according to IDEA, you have access to all of your child's educational records. All means all. You might need to review some documents that were provided by another school that because your family moved from one district to another, but you still can request documents from that school because they were doing something really that was really helpful and successful for your child. So you want to read about what strategy or technique or resources they were using so you could bring them up to the new IEP team that you're working with now. So you do have access to educational records of your child. And the fourth bullet on the left side there, you have an opportunity to present a due process complaint. Due process is another way of saying impartial hearing. When I conduct workshops on the impartial hearing and mediation, I say you have an issue that cannot be resolved on in the classroom level or the school level or the district level for whatever reason, and under IDA, you have a right to request from the school district, from the IEP team, that you would like to have a due process hearing. So there's a form that you have to fill out, carefully describing why you are requesting this due process hearing, and so you follow that process. I always tell parents this is a very contentious, very complicated process. And basically, what parents are doing is they are suing the school district for not being able to provide FAPE to their child. Once again, FAPE is a very important component of your rights. So when you understand what FAPE is, and you also understand how your child's disability affects his or her way of learning, communicating, acting, etc., you have a really a good understanding if the child is able to provide a free, appropriate public education to your child. And you may consider or determine that it is not. Therefore, you have an opportunity to address your concerns via the due process complaint system. Um, on the other side, it's repeated there again, due process hearings. And underneath that, we have mediation. Mediation is another way of resolving problems that you may have with your child's services, or you are belief or, understanding that he or she is not making progress. We always recommend that parents use the mediation process first because it's much more informal. You can address any and all of your concerns at a mediation hearing. In a mediation hearing, it's you, school personnel, and an individual that's called a mediator who is designed to make sure that we have both sides have stated their cases, their arguments, and he or she is there to help both sides arrive at a compromise that both the parent and the school, the school district can agree to. In a due process and partial hearing, yeah, you're still suing the school system, but in this time, you're basically more in a court hearing where the impartial hearing officer takes the role of the impartial hearing officer is like the judge. You deliver evidence and testimony, and he or she decides whether or not FAPE has been provided or not. The court, the judge, the hearing officer may determine that the school has been providing FAPE in spite of your understanding that he hasn't. So in that case, we could say that you quote lost the case. In a hearing, there's a loser and a winner. But you, of course, you have a right to appeal that court. And I mentioned already that you have the right to participate in all meetings concerning your child's education. Okay, we're almost done here. All right, so this is a quick review of your legal rights under IDEA, that the rights of children with disabilities are protected, that parents are provided with the information needed to make decisions about the evaluation and placement issues, and other concerns that are causing the parents to write this complaint, that procedures and mechanisms are in place to resolve disagreements between parties. And I briefly identified both of them, the impartial hearing or due process uh, uh, meeting, and also the mediation, where are two mechanisms that are available to parents to resolve disagreements. And that parents have the right to inspect and review all of their child's educational records, not only those that are relevant to whatever issue or concern has risen and being discussed at these sessions. So these are just once parents understand what their rights are, I think they're in a much better position to participate actively and more positively in the IEP and all these other meetings that we have been discussing. Okay, this is another important point. Um, the school district must provide prior written notice when it proposes or refuses to initiate or start or change the identification of the disability of the child, evaluation issues, educational placement, or the provision of FAPE to the child. Sometimes because parents don't have an understanding of their rights or also what is the job of the IEP plan. Um, Things happen that they're not aware shouldn't be happening. That they just assume that the school has the power to do many things that it really doesn't, because the parents are not in do not understand their rights, or how to practice them. So we always tell parents that these things are very important that you be aware of. That it's not up to the school to make this call. They may want to address why they are considering these issues, but you need to be informed and you need to be part of that conversation. Okay, I'm just, this is a really quick, kind of done, but I just want to take a few minutes. When I read this, I thought it was really interesting. Let me just quickly go through it and why I put in this story about the IEP in the Supreme Court. About 5 years ago, there were parents of a child who had autism and who also had attention deficit disorder, ADHD. And they removed them from his public school in the fifth grade. Then they argued that their child did not make measurable progress on his IEP goals and that the school failed to address his worsening behavior problems. In other words, that the school was not providing FAPE to that student. So they placed their child in a private school where he went on to make better progress. Later on, subsequently, his parents argued that the individualized education plan provided by the public school was inadequate, and they sued to compel the school district to pay for his private school tuition. So anyway, it was a long court, a long, drawn out issue, and finally it wound up in the Supreme Court back in the 2016, 2017, because the parents argued that they wanted their son to be provided with an improved, meaningful educational benefit standard. And that's the point of view that the Supreme Court took to examine this issue. And the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that yes, the parents had a point there. They ruled in favor of a higher standard of education for children with disabilities. And there the cases identified Andrew F. That was the name of the student versus the Douglas County School District. Sorry, I don't recall what part of the country that was in, but you could look it up on Google. Anyway, what one of the outcomes was of this decision was that it will expand the rights of special ed students and empower parents as they advocate for their children. Because here, this last slide is really, really important. Because the Supreme Court declared that every child should have the chance to meet challenging objectives. One of the issues that we've seen in IEPs that when we are writing uh, objectives and goals for the child, they don't really help our children develop. They just develop, offer, you know, um, resources or expectations that do not help our children grow. So the Supreme Court's decision increases educational expectations for children with disabilities and requires students to consider each child's individual strengths and weakness when writing an IEP. And the IP must be not modified so a student with a disability has opportunities to make progress. Please remember that sentence. Under this ruling, your child now must be provided with opportunities to make progress, not merely stay in one area all the time. So the IDEA requires IEPs to be developed with expertise from schools and inputs from parents. Another important phrase. Schools must give conclusive and clear explanations for their decisions on services. This is holding schools to task. Okay, uh, no longer will they be able to not provide meaningful services for a child because now there is a law that was passed by the Supreme Court a few years ago that they must, on the IEP and other documents, provide conclusive and clear explanations for their decision on services, why they provided decisions, why they provided services, or why they did not provide services. So we are thinking that educational advocates and also parents should take advantage of this new tool that we have to make sure that schools are complying not just with the IEP but with this Supreme Court decision. Uh, so here are some important questions I want you to consider after the presentation that we just had here. So if you have a basic or rough understanding of what makes an education of a student appropriate, think about your child. Think about his or her IEP. Do you see how it's providing services, resources, and opportunities for your child that help you understand that they're providing an appropriate education? And is your child receiving an appropriate education? Now that you have a better understanding of what appropriate is, perhaps you can review, go back to your son's, your daughter's IEP, and see if you can develop an understanding or an answer to this question. And the last question, what can you do to ensure that your child receives an appropriate education? I'll give you that one for free. You call for an IEP meeting, and you will now address your concerns, your issues, and then you might even want to mention that Supreme Court law that schools now have to provide opportunities to help to really develop and deliver effective supports for our children. So finally, some some more tips about how you can be an effective advocate for your child. You are an effective advocate if you put it in red. If you understand how your child's disability affects his or her ability to learn and function in the classroom, that is so critical that you have an understanding about that. And there are many places you can go to learn about your child's disability and then apply that information to your child. If second bullet, if you get information, you need to learn about available resources. Um, Organizations like ours, our Metropolitan Parent Center at Synergia, uh, it's just one of many that are available to parents. And we offer all our services free of charge to parents. There are two other parent centers in New York City, but we work as one. So you could just go to the Google and put in some questions of requesting resources for your child. The third one is my favorite point. Ask plenty of questions. You can only ask meaningful questions if you have an understanding of the first bullet, if you understand how your child's disability affects his ability to learn and function in the classroom. Please, please, please do not be shy. Do not feel embarrassed. Raise your hand. Ask questions. They will help you establish yourself as someone who's really there to help your child and all that. And next to the last point, communicate and collaborate effectively and assertively with school personnel, also related service providers, the school principal, etc., etc. Let him or her know that you are there to work with them. We are working as a team to support my child. So that communication and collaboration are effective tools for you to achieve that goal. And finally, always be there for your child. We have to do everything to support our children. After a while, we won't be able to be there for them. So we have to make sure that we've done the best we can to support our child after they finish their educational careers. And the last page has quite a number of resources that address the evaluation process, the IEP, parent rights, a bunch of other things that you can go, and there are many, many more resources that are available. Okay, we're almost, I'm done here, but I just want to make two quick announcements. Please note that there will be another webinar uh, on on May 13th. We're going to have another webinar on May 13th, and the final one will be on the 26th. Please go to our website, which is on the very first slide of this presentation, to uh, to learn about what's going to be discussed and how to register for them. Um, and also at the end of the presentation, I think you'll be asked to fill a survey about what you heard and learned about. We appreciate your feedback. It always will help us out. And I believe that's it. Now, if you've had any questions, my colleague Doris will be able to read them if there are any questions. And thank you so much for your attention. And once again, I apologize for the few technical glitches that we had along the way. We'll work on that too. Thank you.
So we had two questions. One question was, I hear that IEPs are not scheduled regularly. So why is that? And is there anything else that parents can do to change that?
Yeah. Yeah. According to IDEA, the IEP has to be visited at least once a year. Every year, we hold a meeting. It's called. Virtually, let me just before I go into it, there are different types of IEP meetings that you need to be aware of. Uh, the one that I was looking at here is called the initial, the very first IEP meeting that's given when your child goes to a new school or there's issues and you move to another school district and they have to start the process again. Uh, there's another type of IEP meeting that's called the annual review. They typically take place in the New York City schools starting in March and April, where you will be called to a meeting. And basically, that meeting is to review the goals on your child's IEP and to determine if your child has met those goals. And if there's agreement that the goals were made, we design new goals. If you, as the parent, do not agree that the necessary progress is made, two things happen. You have to ask why, and then you have to rewrite that goal in a way that supports your child. Goals are really important components of your child's IEP. I recommend that you go at some point in the near future, pull out your child's IEP, go to where it writes about the goals, and read them and see what kind of information you get out of them. It's really important that you have an understanding of goals. And if you don't, ask for explanations and clarification. And the last type of IEP meeting is the one that I just mentioned, when there is a need to consult with the rest of the IEP team. Notice I said the rest of the IEP team because you are a member of that team. So if an issue appears, all of a sudden you notice a change in your child's behavior or anything that's causing you to worry about his education or whatever, you can request in writing to have another IEP meeting. It's the law. You have that right. If you understand the law, the IDEA law, you know that it says that you have a right to request a meeting whenever you see a need for it. So IEP meetings, depending on when the child starts school, sometimes they start at the regular time that most students starts, which is middle of September. Sometimes for a variety of reasons, the IEP plan is initiated at other points during the school year. But just know that that plan must be revised at least once a year, and that's what they call the annual review. So I hope that I've answered your question. If I haven't, I will try again. But just be aware that you should, when you have some time, um, go to your computer, go to Google, and write in what is IDEA. And believe me, the number of resources you will find are staggering. You will have a lot of information. And I think I put around 10 here in the resource section of the presentation that you could review. All the information I looked at before I put it on here. and I make sure that it's written in a clear, understandable format. So it doesn't have anything legal or technical about it. So please review these resources and anything else you come across so you can understand these processes better. Thank you. Doris?
The second question is,
Okay.
why are discussions of reducing services suggested at the IEP meetings?
Oh, that is a good one. And that reminds me of something I read in the news just the other day. Um, um, you should understand that providing education to students is very expensive. However, providing special education services, placement to children that need them is really phenomenally expensive. Special education is one of the most expensive items in not just the city, but the state and the federal government in terms of dealing with educational needs. So unfortunately, we notice sometimes that when we are discussing related services, paraprofessionals, whatever, that the some other members of the IEP team may try to discourage you from requesting that service or not as many sessions with that service. You want your child to have 3 sessions of occupational therapy, but they will say one, maybe two. Unfortunately, one of the main reasons for that is the cost of that service. It's the cost of the service, and there are many students that require these resources in the New York City school system. I believe that there are 365,000 students in the school system that have been diagnosed with a variety of different disabilities. So another issue is that they may not have that personnel available for your child at that point. But nevertheless, what I tell parents is, I understand your issues, but I am here to make sure that my child receives a necessary and appropriate education that will meet his or her needs. Please use that IDEA language. It will have an impact. Once again, I'm here to discuss or to make sure that my child receives necessary and appropriate services according to his or her unique needs. That's straight out of IDEA. Another another suggestion I recommend is that you could use FAPE. Um, when the school wants to take down that related service to once a week, you know, for whatever reason, you will raise your hand and say, no, no, I don't think that's a good idea because if you do that, you'll be denying my son, my daughter, FAPE. But please just don't go there and say FAPE. You need to have an understanding of it. Once again, go to Google, what is FAPE, FAPE, and you will get a lot of information that will help you. Uh, you are there to make sure that your child receives an appropriate and necessary education to help him or her prepare for life after school. That is the bottom line. So please, let's not feel intimidated by these experts. You are your child's expert, and you have every right to make your points, to ask your questions, to say yes, and to say no. But please make sure you have an understanding of how your child's disability impacts his or her ability to learn, function, communicate, etc. Yeah, I hope that was helpful to you. Are
When a
there any other
family is
questions?
requesting OPWDD,
Say again?
yes, can you hear me, Godfrey?
Yes.
When a family is requesting OPWDD services, should they request it through the IEP meeting?
Yeah, that's where everything starts. And the reason why you are requesting an OPWDD resources is because you have an understanding that your child first has a developmental or intellectual disability. Examples would include autism, uh, certain types of epilepsy and related Down syndrome. Those kinds of disabilities would um, would probably qualify for OPWDD resources. So yeah, once again, the IEP meeting is where you talk about anything and everything that's of concern or interest to you. That is your forum because you are part of that team. And as a member of the team, you have every right to make comments, ask questions. You can even propose goals once you have an understanding of the issues about your child's disability. So yeah, we recommend that parents ask uh, anything, all questions at the IEP meeting. And when you get responses from members of the team, it's also a good idea to ask them to provide their responses in writing, especially if they are promising you access to services, supports, etc., etc. It's always a good idea to get that information in writing. You may need somewhere down the road, you may need some kind of written proof that that statement was actually or that service was actually promised to you. So once again, the IEP meeting is no place to be shy because you have your child's rights, education, and future in mind. Once you have those three components, and and you have a good understanding what it means, you're pretty prepared to engage all these processes and to be there for your child. That's basically the bottom line.
If we have to advocate to Congress during this pandemic regarding not approving waivers, how can we do so?
Repeat that again.
If we have to advocate to Congress regarding during this pandemic regarding not approving the waivers to IDEA, how can we do
Right.
that?
No, no. Actually, thank you for bringing that up. That was I was reading about that because one of the things that's happening, I think, and not just in New York City, but in other school systems, the school systems that are involved with providing children with disability with these services, they're beginning to request waivers. And what that means is that maybe because we have this pandemic here, we can't provide a service because the service providers can go to your home. All kinds of reasons slash excuses. Um, but this is what IDEA says that if the school system is providing an educational and other services to regular students who don't have disabilities, they also have to provide those services to students with disabilities. And that also means the IEP. So I think your question was also your answer. It is a really good idea for you to contact uh, your members in the Congress, not just the federal Congress, but also in New York State. Um, Also to the mayor, uh, make a plea that say, I understand that if the school is providing services to students, they need to be able to provide services to students with disabilities too. Uh, and just express your feelings about eliminating even temporarily these services. These waivers may have a way of becoming permanent down the road. So let's make sure that we do and we fight like hell to make sure that our students always have access to these services. Once again, the bottom line is if he or she doesn't have this service, this may really impact on his life down the road. Uh, so yeah, you are your child's most effective advocate because you are an expert about him or her. And write that in your letter. I'm the expert. I know what my child needs. And I know what will happen if he doesn't have access to these resources and these services. So what can you do to make sure I'm writing the letter for you? What can you do to ensure and or ensure that these waivers can either be eliminated or written in such a way that they only will be temporary in nature, and that at some point things will return back to normal at some point. We don't know when that's going to be. But no, your child should be able to have access to these services. Write that letter. Please write that letter. Thank you.
What can I do or say if I disagree with my representatives' recommendations during the IP meeting coming up?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. You cite your disagreement. A little while ago, I said you have a right to ask questions. You also have a right to say, yes, I agree with what you said, and you have a right to say no. Please, my recommendation is if the parent is working with a team of other experts. If you really believe that you are an expert about your child, and you should, because you've been raising him or her for God knows how long, and you hear some information that you don't understand or disagree with, raise your hand, state your disagreement, and hopefully that disagreement will be engaged and resolved. But if it doesn't, if it's not resolved at some point, and it has some kind of a strong impact on your child's provision of IP services, remember you can always file a formal complaint. Parents have a right to file a formal complaint with that school district, with the IP team, if once again they believe that their child is not getting FAPE from the school. I am telling you, I'm a teacher. I think I'm going to give the participants a homework assignment. Go do some research on FAPE and also least restrictive environment. Those are really two powerful tools that parents have and can use if they know how to use them. All right. So if you hear some information that is you don't understand or agree with, make a point of it. Raise your hand and say, I don't understand or agree with what you said. Can we have a conversation about what you just said so we have an understanding? If there's no understanding, then you will go, okay, I guess I think I'm going to have to file a formal complaint because what you recommend or what you're saying goes against provision of FAPE for my child. I'm telling you, when they hear parents talk about FAPE, LRE, IDEA, it will get their attention. It will get their attention. They will start looking at you in a different way. And I'm saying that because that's what I heard from many of the parents that have come to our workshops. Then I asked the mom, are you sure you understand what FAPE is? And I asked her to recite it. I said, yep, you got it. So please use some of the tools that IDEA has provided for you. Understand how to use them and use them. And I think you'll have some beneficial and positive results when you use those tools at these meetings. Thank you.
How does IDEA and FAPE apply to the college years? And can my child have a paraprofessional in college?
Wow. You know, when I was reading that slide about that, I thought about this point. Remember at the very beginning when when we read and I read with you that IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, um, is available for children from preschool or 3 years old, 3 years of age through high school, which is in New York City, 21 years of age. Because I remember a question that a parent asked me, similar to yours, where she said, how can I make sure that this college will observe my child's IEP?" My answer was really quick. It won't. The college of your child that you're sending your child to will not observe or implement the IEP because it can't. Because the IEP, remember, according to the law, is over when he or she is 21 years of age. But that doesn't mean your child cannot get services because the last 2 or 3 years of your child's educational career, I'm talking about high school. I also tell parents that the IEP team has been reconstructed to be considered a transition team. We are now here to discuss services, supports, and opportunities for my child that will help him or her after she or he is finished with high school. And if it's appropriate for your child, he or she should be a member of that team. Uh, Usually, we recommend to parents once he or she is starting middle school, junior high school, it's when you start thinking about that transition team. And that's a great point you might want to make. If your child is in that age category, next time at that IP meeting, you might want to raise your hand and say, I understand that, IDEA recommends that we start addressing transition services, programs, opportunities, etc. And then you say, I think that should be the focus of this team now. And it'll be very hard for them to disagree with you because it's kind of hard to disagree with a law like IDEA. So understand that the IEP is only operational between preschool, 3 years of age, through high school, 21 years of age. If you have a child that can go to college, uh, wonderful. My recommendation is that you working with the school, specifically um, there is a person in each school district called LT, the transition leadership person. I think, I'm sorry that I'm not remembering the right acronym right now, but ask for someone that deals with transition services in your child's school and make a meeting with him or her and bring up these issues that you have that are really important and a very good one. Uh, Transition leadership person, TLP, right? And have a conversation with him or her. Bring up these points that you have brought up right here and get some answers that make sense. So one recommendation that person will make, let's start looking through the websites, through the internet. I couldn't remember the word. Let's look at schools and see if they have programs or offices that support students with disabilities, whether they be reading disabilities, learning disability, or whatever. Most of the students that have disabilities that go to school can always rely on going to an office in that program that will support them, that will make sure that they can not only go to college but stay in college. So that would be a really important thing that you do to ensure that your child has a meaningful future after she or he finishes school. Thank you.
What's your advice about counseling for kindergartens?
Counseling for kindergarten. Oh yes, that's all right. That's a good point too because um remember I said the IDEA takes place from 3 years old on. Uh, but kindergarten, usually we have children that are could be maybe 2 years old or younger, depending on the program, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the things that I bring to parents' attention is that if you have a very very young child, kindergarten or younger, you should always inquire. Um, excuse me, let me get a sip of water. Oh, okay. Hmm. Doris, what's the name of that program that's offered in New York City for families that have toddlers? Early
Head Start?
Head Start is one of them, but no, there's another one that It'll occur to me in a moment, but let me just address the issue of kindergarten. First of all, a child that's in kindergarten cannot be diagnosed with a disability until she is of school age, and that would be 5 years of age. Um, but I have seen IEPs in the preschools that that where they have to indicate the disability they can't. Once again, this is the law says that a child cannot be diagnosed with a disability until we do the evaluation process. So in that case, if there is consensus that the child has a disability, but we can identify that, usually what they put in that blank is the phrase preschooler with a disability. And that's what you'll see in children that are from 3 to about 5 years old. When they become 5 years old, they're considered school age, and that's where a formal evaluation is done. Oh yeah, I remember the name of the service now. There's an early intervention. In New York City, this is a fabulous program designed to support parents that may have a child with a disability. And briefly, early intervention brings a team of individuals, including service providers, a manager that works not just with the child but with the family, to help address the child's needs and to help prepare the parent for what her next steps should be when looking at preschools for your child, and then later on for how to identify a kindergarten program and a school that would be there to service her needs. So my best advice is for that parent to have a lot of conversations with the school teachers that work with their child. And yes, you can might also ask for progress reports. Kindergarten has changed a lot since I was of kindergarten age. It's much more there are more demands made of children in kindergarten to really speed up their learning process. And if the child has an issue with understanding that, that's gonna interfere with that learning process. So ask the teacher how she teaches, how she plans. You could ask the teacher, give me a plan or an idea of what you can do to um, to help my daughter with and whatever the need is. You can do that. There's no way that you cannot be denied that information. You're asking a question. Can you tell me what you would do to make sure that my child learns how to write his name on that line and not over it or under it or whatever? You can do that. Maintain that conversation with that with the people that work with your child. Once they understand that you're really there to support the child, they should be able to support you in your need for understanding. Okay, so I think that's good. But once again, if the young child has a disability, that's I forgot to say that most of the disabilities that we mentioned here are are for the life of that person. So what we need to do is to understand the needs, how to address them effectively, and how to provide opportunities for our children to help them learn and to benefit from life after they finish school. So I hope that's helped your question, and thanks very much. Hello?
Godfrey, were you trying to say early intervention earlier?
Yeah, I said it.
Okay, let's
Thank you
see.
anyway. EI.
For those people that were wondering if the presentation will be sent at the end of the class, it seems that you could have access to it somewhere within the presentation. I'm not sure exactly where.
Yeah,
Godfrey will be sending this presentation via email.
yeah. I believe yes because when before we started, I talked to our tech person, and she said that it was. that the presentation that you viewed, you have access to. Um, I haven't confirmed that yet, but I believe that I remember seeing on the screen before we started the webinar that there was this little a red folder on the bottom that I think if you click onto it, um, you should be have access to that. In either case, you will be. We have your information. We have your email address. If you don't get it from what we just talked about, it will be forwarded to you. I'll have access to your email addresses, and I'll make sure that you have a copy of this presentation. And my only recommendation as a teacher is that you go through the resources that are listed in the back. They will help amplify and clarify and embellish many of the points that I've made. And once again, I make sure that they were written in parent-friendly language. There's nothing technical about that. And that reminds me of another point. When you're at the IP meeting, and let's say the school psychologist is delivering his reports, and he's talking to the group like everyone else that there was a school psychologist, please raise your hands and say, "I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're saying. Can you please say it in a way that I can have understanding of your information?" All right? You got to understand what we're saying about these issues, especially how they pertain to your child. Always ask for clarification. Like I said before, don't be afraid of saying yes or don't be afraid of saying no if that's what needs to be done. Okay. So yeah, I'll make sure that you get copies of this presentation. Please note that on May 13th, I believe, I will be doing another webinar, and that one will be on the evaluation process. Really important. You are welcome to attend to that. And on the 26th of May, I believe that's a Tuesday, I will be addressing transition issues or how to help your child prepare for life after school. So if you're interested in that, please go to our website, synergiany.org. When you get to our website, click the calendar tab and then forward to May. You'll see the dates that I said there. They describe the webinars. You just click on the box in that date, and you'll be taken to the registration page like you were for this presentation. I hope that you could attend those webinars. And yeah, I love your questions. I really appreciate your feedback. I think it's makes it more meaningful for me too. Are there any other questions?
I believe that's all for now. If anybody has any further questions, I believe they could ask them on the website, right, or find
Yes,
the email information. Yes.
right. hmm Thank you, everyone. Please stay safe during this serious crisis. We're all praying that it'll be over soon, but please stay safe and yeah, always be there for your kids. Thank you and stay healthy. Goodbye.
Godfrey, Mr. Rivera.
Oh,
Yeah,
can
I
I?
don't remember how to close this off, so that's why I'm like just
Well, I
just
see people
exit.
are signing out.
Yeah.
Let's see.